How want to tell them to do? This year the Queen Quet won't go again for this year Gullah Geechee Nayshun Nyews. I'm going to tell them, no, every time you're going to with me and things like that, y'all be always want to ask me why to do anything. So I had a show on the why to do for this year show. Well, one of my done see this face, I leave out earlier in the year on some week pictures and things like that, because they've been from St. Knoxville. But this year time we did the Hardmaker Center, way up in the mountains, they ain't flat like we had it here. This year the Dr. Carolyn Finney, and gal is still way out you want to put the other rest of the coast in California now, and things like that. Dr. Finney, how are you doing? I am doing really good. Excellent. Now, you are what type of a doctor?
I am a geographer. I look at the relationship between people and place. People ask me why people do what they do, where they do it.
Okay, so see, that's excellent. Yeah. Because when we hear the term geo, a lot of times we don't know exactly, we just mean geography, but that's a whole nother dynamic.
It's really, for me, it's all about the people-place relationship. So we say everything is geographical.
Yes, and that makes a lot of sense. Right. So now, in terms of what you do as a doctor, how does that relate to this? I know that we're just closing out the Second Century Commission meeting, and you served on that commission.
Yes, I did.
So now, what exactly was your charge, and why were you part of it?
I feel that I was invited because I'm really interested in thinking about, well, in particular, this was about the national parks and looking at the shape of the national parks and how do we get support from the public, how do we engage the public. And my interest in my own personal research is looking at people, looking at the issue of difference, race, class, gender, nationality, how difference informs the way people are able to participate in any kind of decision making having to do with the environment. So they invited me on board because they were interested in the issue of diversity, broadly defined. How do we get diverse people to engage in both supporting the parks, using the parks, getting jobs in relation to the parks, contributing to the ideas and strategies to maintain and sustain the parks, both natural and cultural resources. And I'm just like, well, that's great, but you got to have all the people at the table.
All the people at the table.
Yeah.
Because interestingly enough, like you said, diversity, but largely defined.
Largely defined.
Because sometimes you hear diversity and you say, well, oh, that's an exchangeable word for multicultural.
Right, that's right.
Or that's a word that means, well, 10 white guys and one black woman and one Asian woman. You know, we
I have been there.
You've been there so far. You know, and so when you say diversity, but actually people could say diversity meaning it's a bunch of men, so add women.
That's right.
It could mean that there's a bunch of one ethnic group, add another ethnic group.
That's right.
There's a bunch of one race, add another race.
That's right.
And then try to create a different, as we say, power.
That's right.
And so when you talk about decision making with the national parks, a lot of times we don't hear discussed amongst people of African descent.
Right.
And because we don't hear it discussed, a lot of times people say, well then that means, quote, black folks don't go to the park. Okay. I mean, have you heard that? Because I heard that.
Well, you know, so how I originally met you, my research was looking at the issue of African Americans and African Americans broadly defined and the environment. Their perceptions, our beliefs, our memories, the issue of identity, how we identify, and you know, I know from your community, you totally understand that relationship between how you think about yourself and how you think about the place in which you live. And so, and of course, that for me is a total myth. It's not that black folks don't care, aren't interested, or are not engaged. It's just that they have their own stories. It's not always visible. It's not always engaged, those stories, and that way of thinking about land and place. And so for me, it's about not just inviting people who haven't been invited, because that's all about privilege, the ability to invite. And sometimes it's not about me just coming to your table, but it's also the ability of those with that privilege to be able to change the way they think about difference and who is different. And saying, like, there's not just one story about how we should be related to parks or the environment. There's a myriad of stories, and we all can learn and gain from understanding those stories and that relationship.
And you know, it's interesting because as I'm hearing you talk about that, I start seeing quilts. Because you know, in Gullah Geechee tradition, quilting is a major craft of ours. You know, everybody thinks it's only sweetgrass baskets, but it's not true. Quilting is a major craft, and I still quilt. So I'm picturing all of them. Your mom does, see? And so those pieces, you take those pieces from each place, and if you put them together, they each have a different story.
Right, that's right.
I mean, just one part might have come from a dress that you wore in high school. Something might come from a pair of jeans that I wore in high school. Something else might come from your first boyfriend's shirt when you ripped it off him or something. So So you just never know. And you take all the pieces and you sew them together. But if you sew them the right way, that quilt will last for generation after generation after generation.
And the other piece I want to add is that there's always change taking place. And one of the things I like about quilts is that you're always adding in, you're adding in something. There's nothing that's static.
No.
And so people love sometimes, when I look at the parks and stuff, that we have the story and they sort of built an organization on it, and the story doesn't change. And it's like, what's the story? How the land changes, the people change, how we think, our world is always changing. So we have to learn how to be flexible and move with that as well.
Exactly. It's interesting because what you're talking about with parks, we deal with museumization of culture. Because you have interpretive centers, you have museums, and people tend to think there is one story, there's one way that story is done, and that if you don't do it that exact same way all the time, you're not doing it according with museum science or interpretation. It's not correctly done. It's not authentic. But the authentic thing is that everything changes.
That's right.
And that it's not bad that it changes. It's just that we need to grow and evolve within that change and be able to find what we can celebrate together.
That's right. And for me, part of the way we can find that is through the relationship. The focus is not on the thing itself necessarily, but the relationship. So whether it's between a community of people in the place they live, whether it's between two people, whether it's between an organization and an idea, it's the relationship between those things. Is that relationship something that we can learn from, that we can grow from, that are supporting us and helping us move forward? And if it's not, if that relationship needs to change,
then we need to change it. Right. Excellent. So I'm so proud of the work you've done and the other commissioners here at this Second Century Commission. And I know some people said, well, Second Century, y'all make mistakes. No, we're not. It's the Second Century of the U.S. National Park Service that we're planning for. So don't get, as we said, don't get it twisted. We know what century we're in. And we're trying to make sure that we plan for the future centuries. So there's not just us that are there at the meeting that are creating the diversity, but that maybe we won't even need to use that word anymore because everybody.
The day comes soon.
Yes, I know. Well, we can go to the top of a mountain and just shout, right? And so that definitely everyone's story, the relationship to the place, why that's valuable to them,
and that everyone has a story.
That's right,
and that's for me the most important. Everybody has a story that we can learn from.
Exactly. That's it, that we can learn from. And we just have to know to respect each other enough to realize that I can learn from you.
That's right.
You can learn.
That's right.
Exactly. And so, Hannah Chillin, this year the Dr. Carolyn Finney, and Hannah done know that this year the Queen Quet head on the body of this year Gullah Geechee Nation, and this year the what going on coming from up in the mountains of Tennessee. All right. Here at the Howard Baker Center, we're closing out the Second Century Commission meeting, and it has been a wonderful event. You'll see us again, probably outdoors next time.
That's right.
Peace.
Earlier today, not that long ago, Lauren was talking about how Ken Burns' film was really about the history up to 1980 of the National Park Service. And that we are looking forward to the future, and that's a lot about what our recommendations are about. I was thinking to myself, yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. One of the questions that we were asked as commissioners was to think about what will the parks be like in 20 years or in 50 years. And one of the things that's not a mystery is if you take a look at your census and look at your census data. So the census says that in 2042, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, East and South Asian Americans will be in the majority. They will be in the majority. Our public, our citizenry is going to look very different than it looks right now. In the year 2023, the shift will begin to show in people under the age of 18. So all of those people being born, or just being born, are going to think very differently about themselves in relation to each other as well as their relationship to the parks. So as commissioners, when we were thinking about what it means to connect people to parks, for me it's beyond visitation and engagement. It's really about collaboration. It's really about having a vision that considers other ways of experiencing the natural environment, the cultural environment. Our vision: all members of American society have an opportunity to build a personal connection to parks and see them as meaningful in the context of their own interests, values, and perspectives.